SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Hello and welcome to iGaming Daily, brought to you by Optimove, the #1 CRM solution for the iGaming market. I'm James Ross, and today I'm joined by iGaming expert senior journalist Danny Lee, where on today's episode we will look into the fascinating intersection of gaming, gambling and regulation. Today we're going to dissect the video game Balatro, which is the roguelike card game that's sparking debate about gaming and gambling. Yesterday, the game had its rating dropped, initially receiving an 18+ rating from the Pan-European Game Information, otherwise known as PEGI, due to its poker elements. This has now been reclassified to a 12+, along with another game titled Luck Be a Landlord. And this will be the focus of today's episode of iGaming Daily. Danny, welcome. How are you doing today?
Not too bad, James. It's always fun to do one of these podcasts that kind of crossovers between the different sort of industries, and obviously covering slots a lot of the time on SlotBeats and iGaming Expert. It's quite fun to see that crossover between video gaming as well and get to dive into a topic like this.
Yeah, I'm a video game nut, so whenever these conversations or topics kind of intertwine, I jump at them at the first opportunity I can possibly get. And this is the earliest we can actually talk about it. And Balatro, I've played it. I've enjoyed it. I was actually kind of swayed to play it by John Romero when we did a interview with him before Casino Beats Summit last year, now known as SBC Summit Malta for this year. And great recommendation. Have you played it?
I haven't played it. I've got many friends that have told me about it, and sort of how, I guess, like addictive, I guess is the right word to use if it's not a gambling game that we're talking about.
Yeah.
How addictive it can be, and it's obviously like taken the mobile gaming industry by storm a bit last year. I've seen that it's won many awards and things, and I've certainly heard a lot about it.
Yeah, I remember, because I sat in on John Romero's keynote at Casino Beats Malta last year. Again, now SBC Summit Malta. And he did mention, kind of when it comes to innovation, that Balatro was a really great example of how we can take inspiration from the video game world and kind of inspire change in poker, which, to be honest, is very hard to kind of innovate within. So this story kind of is interesting because sometimes it might actually contrast what he actually said and maybe the kind of main premise of it. But the game itself was, like you said, for maybe want of a better phrase, addictive. But it was one of the most successful games in 2024. You know, it was nominated for the Game of the Year award by the Game Awards. That narrowly missed out to Astrobot, but it also won the Best Indie Game at the Golden Joysticks Award and the Best Mobile Game at the Game Awards. So it's hugely successful. Yet, it was perceived as a gambling game. Now, the question is it a gambling game? And before we kind of delve into the kind of like the nuances of everything, I kind of want to ask you that outright of what you think this game actually is. Do you think it's a gambling game? Do you think it should be rated 18 for gambling?
It's such a tricky topic, isn't it? Trying to define these sort of games. Like, there's countless games that we could have this debate over. Balatro, obviously, a key part of it is the fact that whether it's got like loot box elements that we can touch on later or not, it's a game that incorporates like elements of actual gambling games, whereas sort of other games that might have these sort of gambling elements within them are more focused on, like, it could be a sport or it could be like a first-person shooter type game. So because of the fact that it's got these multiple elements, you might think that maybe that 18+ rating was sort of deserved in a way. But at the same time, you know, it's tricky for the regulators to try and define what these games are themselves. And to be honest, myself, having seen the game and seen footage of it, it doesn't seem like there's any harm that could be being caused to any players, other than the fact, like I said earlier, it might be a bit addictive and it might keep them on their phones a bit more. But they're not actually losing money, which a lot of people would define gambling as. Like, you're not in a sense that you're losing money in a way to try and gain money in some way, get financial gain from what you're spending.
Yeah. I'll give my thought in a minute, but I just want to jump on kind of what you said about it's hard for the regulator within the video game space, or for PEGI to kind of give a rating to something like this. But I think maybe the issue that's kind of risen from this, and the developer of Balatro, who's Local Thunk, nobody knows who he actually is. He's just known as Local Thunk. That's what he's took issue to, I think, when it was originally given an 18+. That you have games like FIFA, you have games like Fortnite, that FIFA is a 3+ game, yet it incorporates elements of loot boxes in there, which we'll touch on in the second half, because Steve Hoare, the editor of the Player Protection Hub, has kind of a really good insight into that. But that's where his issue came from. Now, from my perspective, the game itself is poker in a different kind of way. But the main premise is, like, you have to kind of get the higher base tier cards, so the royal flushes, the straights and stuff like that. You have to get those cards to get higher score and higher ratings. And that, to me, is teaching poker. Now, is teaching the same as gambling? One could argue it will lead to that in the future. So that's an interesting element where I think maybe dropping it to an 18+ isn't the most sensible of options. I mean, for Local Thunk, it's brilliant for him because he's not tethered to an 18+. That game can be sold to more of a wider audience. He'll create more of a revenue from that, so fair play. But I do think there are forms of gambling elements in there. Maybe not from a monetary transactional point of view, but definitely from an educational teaching of the game point of view. And that there is the RG, responsible gambling issue, which I think it faces.
I think it might just be a case of these regulators sort of needing to broaden the definitions of what is gambling and what isn't when it comes to things like this. Because obviously gaming is constantly evolving, and these features just going to keep being implemented into games that are at the forefront of the mobile gaming industry, of the video gaming industry, and they're going to have to try and keep up with the fact that because this game has done so well, it's likely that other developers are going to look at the fact that they've taken a form of gambling, a feature within gambling, and made it into a game that obviously hasn't been considered as gambling. Some might, but on the App Store now, particularly with PEGI's rating, have now changed it down to 12. It clearly isn't considered gambling by them either. But they're going to try and produce more games that are like this, and with that, obviously players need to be protected, and if age ratings are going to be being reduced for games like this, then they need to make sure that maybe there's some other form of protections in place just to make sure that I guess education that you're talking about in gambling in terms of how to play poker doesn't lead to a massive influx of young people or players 12 from above actually being encouraged to play actual poker and move on to gambling. It would be quite interesting to see that correlation there of people, I guess, because it's been an 18+ game that have started playing Balatro and gone, oh, you know what, it might be quite fun to incorporate these skills that I'm learning and I'm doing quite well into actual real money gambling and gaming.
Yeah, I mean, there was a problem gambling severity index, the PGSI. I can't remember the exact figures, but what they do look into is the youth and how they got into gambling, and if it was due to family members playing some type of gambling product, either it's an online slot on their phone, either we're taken into a retail store, which I don't think they're allowed to anyway, or even in this sense, if you're playing on your Xbox and you're playing Prominence Poker, if you're playing Balatro, which is now perceived not to be a gambling product, all of this may potentially, hypothetically, have an impact on the youth growing up and then getting, again, not addicted to gambling, but becoming interested in poker. And if you do it in the right way, if you do it in the entertainment way, that's absolutely fine. But to be exposed at a younger age of 18+, I think treads on murky waters, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've seen games like this come around before that you sort of look at and you think, if I had children, would I want them to be able to access this game at an age lower than 18?
10 years' time, I won't be touching it.
Exactly. And I looked at Coin Master, for example, having written a lot about slots, and you see how the mechanic basically does just work like a slot title, but it's not considered gambling because you can't make any financial gain from it. even though you can make sort of these freemium purchases that these developers refer to. So it's like I say, it's a bit of a grey area. It's very like murky waters, so to speak. And I suppose it's up to regulators to decide and listen to experts, listen to trade bodies, and decide these are the specifications that we're making for what is a gambling game and what isn't, and hand out the appropriate ratings to these games.
Mm-hmm. That Coin Masters is an interesting one because, again, if you actually look on both Apple's App Store and then Google Play App Store, I think that's what it's called, both of them have different age ratings. Apple has a 17 plus, while Google's is 18 plus. So again, there's that inconsistency that I've said his name 1,000 times, but Local Funk, sorry, that's a kind of example Local Funk said about inconsistencies. And maybe that's where, when it comes to video games, there needs to be that conversation. There needs to be tighter regulations when it does come to maybe some form of DLC that has that RNG element into it. We haven't mentioned PEGI, though. Like, they've released a statement that they said they're going to accept the decision of its complaints board and that it will continuously evolve in line with cultural expectations and the guidance of independent experts. And that means there are going to be new rule changes, which will mean gambling themes do not automatically lead to an 18 plus rating. Instead, it will be limited to games that simulate casinos and betting halls. I mean, that to me kind of screams PokerStars Infinity VR gambling world. That steers towards, again, more murky waters of there's no inconsistency, but there's no clarity on what people in the video game world, or even PEGI, understand to be a gambling product.
I think there's sort of a bit of an easy win there for people that are trying to develop similar games to this as well and try and maybe make the next Balatro or something that incorporates similar elements, in that if they just don't make it look like they're simulating a casino or a betting hall, then that's it. They're gonna avoid these sort of regulations.
Mm-hmm. But again, to play devil's advocate, should they be developing games like this? It's a hard one because, again, from a point of view, you're teaching someone how to play poker from a safe environment, teaching them the rules, and again, there's no physical gambling in there, but there's gateways for a reason. That's why they call them gateways.
But these games are successful. Like Balatro has just shown that if you incorporate these sort of elements into these titles, then you can have a really effective game, something that gains a lot of traction, becomes really popular. And for a mobile game like Balatro, it's performed really well. Like I rarely sort of hear about a mobile game that's come out, to be honest, these days. Like, I don't really take part in mobile gaming myself, but I'd heard about Balatro, like this big boom within that game last year, sort of almost like everywhere at some points.
Perfect. I think we've run over in the first half, so we're going to take a quick ad break. When we get back, we're going to hear from Steve Hoare, the editor at the Player Protection Hub, on his thoughts on Balatro, and also look into the dip feature that is in Balatro. So stay tuned.
SBC Summit Rio is back from the 25th to the 27th of February. Join us at Rio Centro for Brazil's biggest betting and iGaming event. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Welcome back. As I mentioned, we're going to start off this section listening to Steve Hoare, what he has to say on Balatro, because, again, when it comes to this on lowering the age rating, the conversation then has to lead to player protection and responsible gambling, certainly when it includes people under the age of 18, but they also have the at-risk people as well, who can be over 18. So this is what Steve has to say.
So this Balatro game is an interesting case study, I guess. I don't think because it looks like poker or even performs like poker means that it should be an 18 plus game. It's, that's even before we get into poker being a game of skill and skill games and should they be regulated and blah, 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 which is a fairly hot topic at the moment. But I think the issue with Balatro is it seems that you can buy new outfits, power-ups and so on, which is fine, but they're a lucky dip, which means you don't know what they're going to be until you buy them, which gives them a very similar dynamic to loot boxes. Now, loot boxes per se aren't a gambling product, and so aren't necessarily an 18-plus product as it stands, but there's just been some research released by Professor Mark Griffiths and some of his esteemed research buddies about loot box buying, and it concluded fairly firmly that loot box buying is associated with gambling disorder and internet gaming disorder, which is, video games, not just gambling games, and also that loot box buying is strongly associated with depression, anxiety, stress, and impulsivity, which are mental health symptoms. So my point being, in a roundabout way, that if these dynamics, these lucky dip things that you can buy are the same as loot boxes, then the current research suggests that perhaps they could be an 18 plus. There certainly is an argument for making them 18 plus, although there's no laws or actual advice saying they should be at the moment. However, the Advisory Board for Safer Gambling, which is the Gambling Commission's Advisory Board for Safer Gambling, has argued that loot boxes should be classed as gambling. However, they are fairly strongly anti-gambling, the Advisory Board for Safer Gambling. So take that how you will. So that's kind of what I think about Balatro.
So that was Steve Hoare, and an interesting point that he brought up was loot boxes and this, I believe it's called dip. Is it dip or drip?
Is it lucky dip, something like that? It's that type of feature, isn't it, where you spend money on an item and you don't know what you're going to get. So there's that sort of element of gambling within that purchase.
Yeah, it is the lucky dip style. And that's what Balatro offers. Like you said, it contains outfits, power-ups, and other bonuses. And we've seen other games in the past. We've mentioned it in the first half, so we can dive a bit more into it now. And FIFA, they offer loot boxes in terms of when they're within their Ultimate Team, where they pick it, where you purchase FIFA points or you use in-game currency to buy packs, which are RNG generated, and you get either a Team of the Year Mbappe or you get a
Danny Welbeck.
I was going to say Rasmus Højlund, but a United fan hurt me a bit there. You can get either amazing or you can get awful. You don't really know what you're going to get. And there's other games which in the past have fallen foul to kind of loot boxes. A key one was EA again. Their Star Wars Battlefront 2, when that was released, it was heavily loot box to the point it was pay to win. The fans, there was an outcry of it to the point that they scrapped it completely, but that ruined the game in a sense as well, because there was nothing really to achieve. What are your thoughts on loot boxes? Because there's no tight regulations on them in the video game space.
It's such a tricky debate, really. Like, as someone that grew up playing FIFA Ultimate Team, sort of begging my parents some weekends to just give me a bit of money for some FIFA points. I understand that these features, they do have a lot of crossover with actual gambling, and that's sort of there is a sense of addictiveness there that young people could be obviously so prone to with these games, just wanting to get the best items or the best players for the team, whatever like that. And a lot of the time when you make these purchases, the majority of the time you don't really feel like you've actually sort of gained something that was worth the money you spent. I know that was the case a lot of the time with FIFA, and a lot of my friends who would be making the same purchases, often be a case of, it feels like a waste of money, and sort of maybe half the time or even more than half the time when you do make these purchases. But it's such a tricky debate because it all comes down to how you actually define gambling, which is the big question, really, isn't it? Is the fact that because you can't actually financially gain from the purchases you are making, does that mean that it's not actually real money gambling? It's you're paying for a product that, I know FIFA didn't always have this, but they've now included sort of percentages that show how likely you are to gain a certain product or player that they offer, because at the end of the day, you are buying a product that does state that you might get this or you might get that, but you're not going to make any money back from it. Is that gambling or not? And obviously it varies between different people. It varies between different countries, because you look at Belgium, I think it was maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago now, they banned loot boxes altogether, right? It wasn't just specific games that have been banned or elements within games have been banned. I believe that. Yeah,
it was in 2018 that Belgium banned loot boxes on the basis that they violated the country's gambling laws, but they don't currently affect games' PEGI age rating, which is something to consider as well. Yeah, it's more murky water, I suppose, and so I guess they don't include those elements in the game that they offer. So maybe if you were playing FIFA Ultimate Team in Belgium, you just can't buy FIFA points, you can't purchase these products. So it's I can see why they would do that, to be honest. Like I said, I haven't experienced it and known what it's like to want to spend that money on something that you're not guaranteed that you're going to really get or gain from. A lot of the time it's such a fine line between like video game and just an element within that to make it engaging and more fun, and then actual like gambling. And when you think that FIFA Ultimate Team they won't be very good, but a 4-year-old is allowed to, but a 3-year-old is allowed to play FIFA Ultimate Team, and should they have access to something that basically is gambling? You got to say no, right? Yeah, you have to say no. And again, my perspective, I know the argument is it gambling if it doesn't involve money? I believe anything that has an RNG element into it and has a case of you give virtual currency. So, I mean, essentially that potentially is what sweepstakes are, really. It's virtual currency for the gain of getting something back in-game. Mm-hmm. And this is what Balatro has with its Lucky Dip feature. Like, that's RNG kind of focus. That's, you'll put your virtual currency in there and you'll try and get these cosmetics or power-ups back. You don't know what you're going to get. You are gambling on getting something good. Just because there's no monetary value in there, it doesn't mean that, again, isn't that gateway to potential addiction in the future, because you're being exposed to these emotions around gambling. So, interesting. I think we are semi-running out of time, but I just want to touch on something really quickly, because obviously Balatro is an 18 and Local Thunk has kind of won his battle to get the PEGI rating lowered. Yet we talk about DLCs, downloadable content, for those who don't know what that abbreviation is. And now there are 12, plus they're still introducing 18 plus DLC that's coming out, because they're getting Fallout 4 DLC and they're getting Dead by Daylight DLC, both 18 plus games, yet you're tailoring that to a 12 plus audience. Aware that means adults can kind of give their consent if they want to play it. But there's a sense of hypocrisy coming about this now, where you're saying gambling, the game isn't a gambling, so it shouldn't be an 18, but you're still introducing 18 plus elements into the game. I find that a bit hypocritical. Don't know if you want a thought on that? I think it's just adding another layer to all of this sort of confusion and the difficulty to actually regulate these games, and a difficulty, I guess, sort of with parents as well, that would be dealing with their children having access to these games. And to be honest, maybe as this sort of change from PEGI is a bit of a recent thing, maybe that's going to add a lot of maybe a more difficult challenge for that Local Thunk to actually bring those sort of elements from games that are over 18 into a game that is now targeted at 12 to 18-year-olds as well. It's just a minefield, really, it seems. It has been for years now, this whole loot box idea and gambling within video gaming, and it's hard to see where there's an endpoint with this until everyone decides either, it's all above board, or it's all, illicit. Yeah. You're bang on. It's hard to see an endpoint. But until then, we'll keep following the developments of Balatro, of PEGI's ratings in terms of gambling or gambling presences, or, poker presence in games. And you'll be able to find that all on SBC's roster of websites, including iGaming Expert, which Danny doing a fantastic job on there. I'll leave any links to articles in the description below. But apart from that, I've been James Ross. I've been joined by iGaming Expert's senior journalist Danny Lee, and this has been iGaming Daily. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.